All right, so you have been ghosted. No warning, no explanation, just silence. It sucks, right? Whether, you expected it or it came out of nowhere, it can leave you wondering, what did I do wrong? Well, what if I told you there's an easy way to find out exactly why you got ghosted? And even better, what if I told you you could understand what being ghosted really meant about you? Well, I think we should go down this path because it'll help us find a way towards our authentic, shining selves and get us into a place where we can express ourselves freely. And hey, once we get to that point, we may actually become a person who never gets ghosted again. All right, so at the very core of ghosting is this really simple and straightforward statement. You get ghosted because the other person no longer wants to or no longer can engage with you. So from this core, we can break it down and work our way backwards to reveal all the fundamentals and specifics behind the behavior of ghosting. So firstly, there are reasons why you get ghosted because they no longer want to continue the connection. Mainly, it's that they've lost interest in pursuing the connection, and that's either because of something on their side or it's because of something that you did. However, as we'll see later, most often it's because that there was never really a connection there in the first place. For reasons why they can't speak to you anymore and end up ghosting you, usually it's because of things out of their control. Maybe they got in an accident, sudden travel plans, or the parents stepped in, or they should never have actually been starting a connection with you in the first place. So you have these practical reasons, and you basically combine it with the idea that a person is just not good at communicating. And that's how you get ghosting, basically. Ghosting is a symptom of our digital age. Everybody seems to be doing it these days. It seems that you can have so many new connections coming up one after the other, then you can just forget about the old ones when something shiny new pops up and takes your attention away. And you also feel like there's no accountability, right? If I just ignore someone, they're never going to see me again. They can't find me, so might as well do that, right? It's the easy way out. So yeah, we can use all of this as our foundation to kind of understand how we should handle, getting ghosted and handle, going through this crappy experience. So the first step in handling getting ghosted is you need to be aware of the natural human response that comes from being ghosted, but do not attach yourself to it. So what I mean by that is our initial reaction to getting ghosted is you're gonna feel like you weren't enough, right? We weren't cool enough or valuable enough, interesting enough, and we may also have wanted their affection or reciprocity, right? Or their approval. And so when we don't get any of these things, we feel like we failed in some kind of way. What's even worse with ghosting specifically is that our nervous system is going to interpret this silence as like abandonment. Subconsciously, it's going to feel like a child whose parents have left them or a tribe that has abandoned them. And this kind of loss is very ambiguous, right? And because, there's no clear reason behind the loss, your brain needs to fill in the blanks with something. And the only thing to fill in that blank is you. So you must be the reason why. But you have to remember that these are all just very deep-rooted psychological instincts that have been there for thousands of years, over evolutionary times, when we failed to secure a mate or we failed to protect our tribe, for example, these same reactions would kick in, right? And these reactions would spring us into action, to find a new tribe or to right the wrongs, by doubling down on our behavior. And it's funny because today we have a lot of new ways to trigger those emotions and instincts, but we don't have the same outlets to go and act them out, right? You can get ghosted, but you can't really go and chase the other person or find the other person or do whatever it is. So you also feel powerless at the same time, So all these pent up emotions mixed with this feeling of powerlessness, that can really get to your head. And that's what kind of takes its toll on all of us. So firstly, you need to be aware of this natural phenomenon that's going to happen when you get ghosted. But you just can't attach yourself to it. You need to find a way to kind of feel these feelings, and, let them pass without kind of letting them define you and, your mentality. You need to do this mainly so that you can get to a point where you can think clearly again. You want to become an objective observer in your life. So a really good way to do this is to flip the script. Think about the times where you ghosted someone. And do you feel like you were the authority figure on who they were as a person and their self-worth? No, right? It sounds ridiculous. So that's a great place to start so that you can kind of interpret when you get ghosted to not let these feelings kind of take over you. So yeah, once you've handled the initial, response, you're now in a position where you can think clearly, objectively, and confidently. And that's great. Because when you're in this space is when you should have an honest conversation with yourself about why the ghosting happened. Like I said before, it must be one of these 4 reasons here. And by being honest and objective, you'll actually realize that a lot of the time, or most of the time, the main reason is going to be that there wasn't actually much of a connection there in the first place. And it kind of makes sense, right? There's so many people on the planet, yet you're not going to have a true connection with everybody. The thing is that it can be hard to admit this, right? Especially when we have strong amounts of desire thrown into the mix, right? We often confuse compatibility with desire. When we feel like we want something, we find all kinds of interpretations and justifications, to kind of validate, or prove our desire is real, right? A common example of this is people mistaking, physical attraction for actual connection. And I think we've all been there before, right? When you're really attracted to someone, it's almost like anything they say we want to agree with, right? And anything they're interested in, then we're also interested in too. A good way to kind of spot this happening actually is at the very start of your connection, when you start to feel some kind of anxiety or nervousness, that's actually a lot of the time your subconscious seeing some kind of incompatibility going on there. The thing is, if we have preconceived fears about being loved and accepted by people we admire, plus, those strong feelings of desire, it can feel very similar to the anxiety you get when you feel like you're not good enough. And, that's another trap to be aware of because you end up confusing these subconscious cues of incompatibility, with these internalized fears of, am I going to be good enough or perform good enough for this person? So for all these reasons, it can really hurt to admit that actually there just wasn't any real connection in the first place. It can feel like another opportunity lost, right? Oh, I've waited so long for this. So you don't want to admit that, but you really have to do this to put yourself in a position of strength moving forward. Then, right, we have all these other reasons here, and they don't have anything to do with you, right? Honestly, it's not worth trying to find out why, they couldn't talk to you anymore or, they chose not to if it's on their end. For you, you just want to be clear on if it's something because you did something specific or not. That's where you want to find your clarity. So yeah, with all that said, we're now left with the last reason that sometimes there is a true connection that you have and it got broken because you did something, to damage that. This is probably what you're most interested in hearing about. And so we're about to get to that right now because the last step in handling your ghosting is actually taking action based on the reason that you've identified. So firstly, like I said, if you realize that there was no connection in the first place, you will want to become more discerning and honest with yourself upfront, right? When you have a new connection, I think you should keep tabs on how you're feeling and be more open to the possibility that, that no connection is there. Obviously, don't be a closed door and try and deny every connection going forward. That's also a protection mechanism on the other side of the coin of that. But don't let your desires cloud your judgment too. I think with the awareness, that's more than enough to be in a good position to do these things. Anyways, if you do acknowledge that there is a connection and the problem was you though, there are actually only a few circumstances in which I would say you can actually reach out again and try and right the wrongs that you've done. So you usually know when you're connecting strongly with someone, right? You really feel that in your gut. There was great initial reciprocity as well. It was easy, it was cohesive, and then, either you kind of changed your tune or you stopped showing up in the same way that you used to. Or you acted in ways that the person didn't like. These are all concrete reasons tied to your actions specifically, which can happen, right? We can't deny that. If you think that this was really the case, then you should definitely reach out, saying something like, hey, I know I haven't been able to show up as I used to recently. Maybe add some kind of reason personal to you, but it has to be true. It has to be authentic, right? And then you can finish it up by saying, that being said, I really did like our connection and found that it was something worth pursuing. I'd really love the chance to pick things up again if you're up for it as well. I think something that honest, earnest, and truthful in this kind of a situation, I think this is where it can really work. It's worked for me in the past on both sides of the coin, and it works because it's an authentic expression of yourself. So in these situations, I would say that digging into why you were no longer able to be consistent in your actions and so on, that's what you should be thinking about when something like this happens, because that's likely something that's due to your lifestyle choices or priorities. And so that's a clear direction for you to introspect, right? However, though, if this kind of reach out does not feel like the right thing to say, if that's the case, I don't think there is much to follow up on there, because as we saw, it's either then there wasn't any connection in the first place, it's just hard to see that, or they, for whatever reasons on their own, that's nothing for you to think about again. As you'll see in the next section, you're only going to want to focus on people who are actually and wholeheartedly interested in you. And the last thing that I would add here is to ask yourself, is it more the ghosting that is affecting you, or is it the rejection? I think this will help you figure out if your issue is with that specifically, or if it's just feeling that, you're not getting that acceptance. I think this will give you a compass on where you should focus working on if you feel things, aren't in the right place yet for you. So yeah, all right, at this point, all we have left to examine now is how all this ghosting relates to you as an individual and how you show up and engage with people. So in getting into what ghosting means about you, the very first thing that you cannot think is that it's your fault because you weren't enough, you weren't cool enough, engaging enough, or whatever. This is the number one thing to not think. Here are the real things that being ghosted reveals about you. Firstly, like I've said before, it reveals that you are not the right person for them, and they were not the right person for you. Our goal is to find cohesion and compatibility in any parts of life, and this just doesn't fit into that when you get ghosted. The next thing that it may reveal about you is that you have the wrong goals or expectations. This is for sure when getting ghosted can really affect you. Say you have goals to be someone who attracts lots of people, for example, or you want to be accepted by someone, anyone, right? Just for the sake of acceptance, regardless of the connection. Or you also kind of, have this narrative that you need something to prove to yourself or to your friends. Those are the goals and expectations that actually lead to you getting upset when you get ghosted, right? When you're looking for true connection and you get ghosted, you know that that's not a true connection and you are much less affected by that. Understanding your goals and expectations is a very good way to know maybe you're in a different place mentally, and that's why you're vulnerable to these kinds of things. The next thing it may reveal about you is that you are not being authentic during the interaction, or you lost your authenticity, especially when it's someone you think you have a strong connection with, or it could go somewhere. But instead of being who you are, you're beating around the bush. You're not having actual conversations. You're saying things, or crafting messages to get the perfect response. Honestly, that's actually boring. Boring is not being who you are and not expressing that. That's what really boring is at the end of the day. People care about passion, and it doesn't have to be in anything in particular. People will be passionate about what you are passionate about, like I said before, especially if there is that strong connection. If you're not being authentic, then you will find yourself trying to make connections with people that you don't have a real connection with fundamentally. And so, if you're not being authentic and following your mantra of finding these cohesive connections, then obviously you're going to get to a point where things kind of break down and you're kind of confused. Yet this whole time, it's actually because you weren't actually looking for these authentic connections. And last but not least, you could also be saying, I tried to be myself. I was being fully myself and I still got ghosted. And I think the response to that is then maybe you may not have enough substance, or you are lacking some substance in who you are. And that might be a harsh thing to say, but what I mean by that is not that you're unworthy or you actually, you don't have the substance. It's more like that substance is hidden. It's kind of suppressed. Maybe because you care more about, being loved than being connected. If all you want to say to someone, say that you like is, oh, I love you, I want you, all this, like if you have these urges to say that to someone you barely know, then that's a clear indication that, there's something missing in your kind of frame of reference and your life perspective where you're needing someone that you barely know to kind of give you all these feelings of connectedness and unity. And you could say that's you being authentic in that time, which is true, but you're not in your element at the same time, right? You're wanting, you're needing, you're in a place where, you're not whole yet. So you are being authentic, but you're expressing fear, right? Because at this point, you don't believe in connecting with your authentic self to someone is going to be accepted and it's not going to get you to where you want to. So then you feel like you can't converse with someone because you're just hiding yourself at that point. And anything you do reveal is just this kind of jumbled up mess, and no one can really understand who that is. So at that point, it's not that you don't have substance, maybe that's a bit harsh, but you don't have a clear kind of connection to it at this time. And I think actually that's a great transition point to the last part of this video, which is how to actually become a person who never gets ghosted. Because I guarantee once you find that substance, once you connect with it wholeheartedly, and once you express it, you will never get ghosted again. So when we combine everything that we've learned in this video so far, we have a very powerful mantra to live by, and it goes like, I want to show up authentically and honestly to find people who I truly connect with in an effortless manner, who like me for who I am and fit with what I'm looking for right now. This is the strongest foundation that will keep the other person engaged and interested in you. This is the basis of what makes you a challenge, mysterious, and someone with character. People chase a vibe. They chase, this good energy and gravitate towards that kind of a center. A vibe means just something that you feel when you're around a certain person or think about that person. Now, a lot of us believe that to have these feelings of, strength and have that vibe, we need some kind of material success or some kind of success in some realm. But the truth is what we actually need is just cohesion. And cohesion is just adhering to your natural tendencies, your natural desires and energies in a smooth way, in a way that supports yourself, in a way that's self-supportive. When you're cohesive and you actually like who you are, you will say what you want with confidence, and you'll say it with clarity. Everything is just okay. Everything just kind of works. And people sense that when you talk and the way that you speak. And that's what's very powerful here. And that's what this kind of mantra kind of talks about, because it's actually a very easy mantra to live by once you let go of all of the outcomes or desires that are associated with all that. When we don't feel cohesive, we're on defense, right? It's like you're in a tribe where, that's not connected in some way. You don't know where the next meal is coming from. Nobody knows who's kind of doing what, so everyone's kind of walking on eggshells and is ready to run to the next tribe. That feeling of uneasiness is a fundamental sign of things not being in the right place. So what's interesting is that we get this same feeling of uneasiness when we start to perform in order to not get ghosted, right? We play it cool, we kind of hide interest, take time to reply to texts. But then again, this just turns you into a performer. You become less real, you become less cohesive, and people will sense that. You even sense it in yourself when you're trying to do those things, right? It just feels wrong. Even so, let's say you do succeed in kind of grabbing that person's interest by performing. Well, this is on a false foundation, right? Eventually, things are going to catch up to you. So you shouldn't try to go this route anyways. You don't want to be in a relationship where you're performing all the time. You're never going to be satisfied for sure. It's a recipe for disaster. But the question then becomes, how do you become cohesive? Well, it's all about becoming comfortable with yourself and expressing yourself regardless of the response that you'll get from other people. And it can be scary to do this for sure, but try this, just do and say the things that feel easy to you. And don't focus on the response, focus on the ease of which that you can express it. It's kind of feels similar to doing something that you're really good at, even just like throwing a ball up and catching it again. You know how easy it was to kind of focus on that process. Do the same thing with what you are trying to say or want to say to someone. It can really feel like jumping into a black void and you don't know what's going to happen, but that's a really good feeling to have. That's something you want to get comfortable with. And, as you do this more and more, you'll start to get different reactions from people, but most of them are actually going to be positive. You'll start to feel a really nice sense of self and good feeling, because you said the things that you wanted to. Once you start kind of getting a taste of it, you actually really, really enjoy it. And then you start wanting more and more. And that's how you kind of set on the path to becoming a new person. And this is where your substance begins to be felt. This is where your light begins to shine. So the funny thing is, people respond really positively to a positive delivery, how you say things. So the positive response often usually just comes automatically when you're speaking in a cohesive way. It can take some time for sure, but trust me, this is the foundation that you want to build and get started off of. And yeah, I will make a video on this specifically in a future time, explaining how to do this exactly as well. So yeah, don't try to do things to get a response. Do things that feel natural to you. This actually reveals the goal of this entire video, which is to not to aim to never be ghosted. You want to aim to always show up authentically with your own energy and with respect and consideration for the other person. That's your end goal. And when you mix this with a genuine desire for true connection, you have a winning formula. I guarantee that this will help you explore so many more connections with so much ease. And this will maximize your interactions with people. And you'll also be okay when things don't work out because you understand what you want and what the situation was. Now, when you get ghosted, you'll know it's not someone that you'll want to continue connecting with anyways. And so you can move on easily from that. So overall, you will always win when you uphold your standards, regardless of how they respond. All right, so to conclude this video, this will not be the last time that you'll get ghosted. But as we've seen, being ghosted doesn't break you, and it should never define you. Abandoning who you are just to avoid being ghosted, that is what really hurts. So you shouldn't aim to never be ghosted again. You should aim to always show up authentically and earnestly, and strive to find that matching energy in the other person. If you keep going down this road, you will certainly find your strength and footing going forward. And hey, you never know. In your new mode, that ghoster may try to find their way back, but at that point, you probably won't even care anymore. I'd love to hear about some of your ghosting stories. Did you ghost someone or have you been ghosted? How was it handled? And what happened in the aftermath? If you like this video, definitely let me know in the comments the next topic that you'd like me to talk about. There's so many topics in the range of personality, relationships, career, philosophy, anything really, you name it. I'm so happy to talk about it. And until then, I will see you in the next video.